Howdy, guys. Today we're going to be doing a lab in ICP today. In that lab, students are going to have this handout. There's 5 different parts to their lab today. They're going to be going through and doing each of those parts. For you guys online, I'm going to kind of record each of those parts into one video so you guys can kind of follow along and then answer the questions on Canvas for this particular lab. Now, the first part is dealing with water and paper towel. Now, it's telling us to fill a beaker with about 50 milliliters of water, which I've approximately done. Future reference, when it says about, you don't have to be exact. So I have about 50 milliliters of water. Now, the next step I need to do is to take a paper towel. I need to crumble it up and soak up as much water as possible. All right, so I've taken this paper towel, I've crumbled it up, and I've soaked up as much water as possible, and this is what I currently have. Now, that brings us to your first question that you will see on your assignment on Canvas, which it might be useful to just kind of go along with that as you go through the video and pause the video as needed. So the first question is, has the water or the paper towel changed into a new substance? Now, the second question is asking what sort of change has taken place as I've absorbed the water with the paper towel. Was it a physical or a chemical change? Now, the next part is telling me to squeeze the water back into the beaker. So I'm squeezing as much as I can. And then it asks another question there at the very end. And I will let you guys read that and answer that on Canvas yourself. Now, the first part of this lab wasn't very exciting. It's just kind of a straightforward, trying to get you thinking about certain things to start out with. So that's the first part of the lab. And let's move. All right, so now we're at the part for the second part of the lab, which is iron and sand. And what we're doing for this part of the lab is we're taking iron filings and we're taking a half a spoonful, which I have a little spoon here. And I'm putting that straight onto a piece of paper. I'm then taking some sand and taking half a spoonful of that as well, and pouring it in with the iron. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to mix that stuff together. So we've got a mixture of sand and iron filings on this piece of paper. All right, so now it's all mixed together. And that brings us to the next part. The next part is, well, you guys probably need to be able to look at it. All right, so right here is our mixture of sand and iron filings. You may need to look at this as you kind of go through and answer those questions. You see I tried to stir it as much as I can, but we still have kind of an uneven mixture, and you can see the bits of iron, and you can see the bits of sand mixed in with the iron. Now, so once we mix that in, the next step is to take a magnet and to kind of wave it around this mixture. Now, I'm going to start, let's see if you guys can still see mixture. Okay, I'm going to start by waving it underneath the paper. So I don't know if you guys can quite see this on the camera, but you can see that stuff's happening as I move the magnet. Ooh, where do I need to go? As I move the magnet on the underside of this paper, you can see that the iron filings are kind of following along. Now, I want to go through and I want to remove the iron filings from the mixture. And so to do that, I'm just going to take the magnet and I'm going to bring it on top of the paper this time. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but at this point, I have collected almost all the iron filings from that mixture. And so I'm going to return them to their container. Now, to return them to their container, I actually prepared for this and I wrapped the magnet with paper. And so all I have to do is remove the magnet from this paper. And there's a lot of the iron filings should end up back in the container. Now there's a little bit left over that I need to kind of remove and place back in by hand. Now, this is after I took out as much of the iron as I could. You see this paper? This paper, that's just the sand left over because all the iron has been removed. So I'm going to take that and I'm dumping it back into the pile of sand that we already have. All right, so that is part 2 of our experiment lab today. So with that, there is 4 questions on Canvas and dealing with part 2. So make sure you answer those. And then I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to move over and we're going to start part 3 of the video. All right, so part 3 is based on baking soda and vinegar. So for part 3, what we're starting with is we are starting with a spoonful of baking soda, and I've placed it into an Erlenmeyer flask. Now we're going to take that, and we're going to take 5 milliliters of vinegar, and we are going to add it to the baking soda inside the flask. Those of you who know what's going to happen, you know what's going to happen. Those of you who don't, let's just see and watch and see. So I don't know how much you guys can see with the video quality, but as you are watching it, you might be able to hear it as well. It's almost fizzing. And we had a effect happen. Let's go ahead and just add some more. I just have a lot of baking soda left over. Woo! All right, so in this situation, I added a lot more vinegar. And you guys can see the effect much better than using just 5 milliliters of vinegar. But that is what is supposed to happen. So now there's some questions involved for this part of the experiment. So go ahead and answer those questions the best you can on Canvas. If you have questions as you're working on them, let me know and I will try to answer them. Go to pause the video and we'll move to part 4 of the. All right, so we're on to part 4 of the lab. Part 4 of the lab is oil and water. On that, we're starting with a test tube with some water in it. We're going to take this test tube and we're going to add a pipette of oil to that. So just give me a second as I do that. Are you kidding me? Pipette's broke. Let's try a different pipette. Okay, so right here we have a pipette of vegetable oil. We're going to take that, we're going to add it to the test tube of water. Now, as you look at this test tube of water, you guys can already see kind of what's happening. We have the oil and we have the water. Now we're going to take it, we're going to shake it up as much as we can. We're going to stop, and we currently have this right here. Now, as we kind of let that sit for a while, hopefully you will start to see what's happening. So you may be noticing that after we mixed it up and let it sit a while, you notice that all the oil is starting to come back up towards the top, while the water is starting to go back towards the bottom. So what we're actually getting is we're getting this layer of oil on top and we're getting this layer of water on the bottom. All right, so that's part 4 of the lab. So go ahead and answer the questions on Canvas for part 4 of the lab. I'm going to pause video and I'm going to set up part 5 and then we will go from there. All right, so we're ready for part 5 of the lab. Part 5 is involving sodium hydroxide and copper nitrates. So our sodium hydroxide comes from this container right here. It's a clear liquid. We're going to start by taking a pipette of this and placing it into our test tube. Okay, so we've added a pipette of sodium hydroxide to our test tube. So that is currently what we have in there. You can see it's a clear liquid. The next step is we are going to take a pipette. We're going to add a pipette of our copper 2 nitrates. So we're going to add 1 drop. All right. So if you guys look closely at this, you may notice something happened. Okay, so we have this blue liquid and then we have the clear sodium hydroxide. And in between, you kind of see something forming, and it looks almost like a mass or a gel or a clog. That is actually a solid forming. So we took 2 liquids and we mixed them together, and we're getting this blue solid that is forming. Now, if I kind of shake it around to try to mix a little more. So anyways, so this part involves us taking these 2 liquids and forming this solid out of them. So this is just the first half of part 5. I'm going to pause the video as I set up the second half of part 5. All right, so for the second half of part 5, what we're doing is we're going to try and separate this solid that we have in here from the liquid that's still in the test tube. So to do that, we're going to set up a filtering apparatus. We're just going to use a very straightforward one. We have a beaker, we have a funnel, and then inside that funnel we have some filter paper. Now the idea is that we are going to separate the solid, trap the solid on the filter paper, and let the liquid drain through into the beaker. So let's see, go ahead and pour this in. Okay, so at this point, we have, looks like we have some of the liquid that's drained through so far. On the filter paper, we still have some of the liquid as well. It looks like it got clogged, so we don't have quite all the liquid draining through. Honestly, it looks like our filter paper sprung a hole in it as well. So this is kind of cheap filter paper, so it's not as effective. But if we look at the inside of the filter paper, I don't know how well you guys can see that, but what you actually see is you see some chunks. Those chunks are the solid that was in the test tube, and it's being trapped on top of the filter paper. Okay. So the whole purpose here was to get the filter paper or the solid out of the liquid, and that's what we were doing here. The filter paper has went ahead and trapped the solid, and eventually all the liquid would drain through, and we'd be just left with solid on the filter paper. So that's the last part of this lab. So you should have everything and seen everything you need to actually answer those questions on Canvas. If you have questions as you're working on it, let me know. I did set it up so you do have 2 attempts. So use those 2 attempts. I will see you guys next class then.